So I'm going to kind of give you vague careers guidance, and really what it is an opportunity for me to talk about myself, because I've had lots of careers, so I get to explain what they are. And I work for Pfizer, as you'll see, in external R&D innovation. I'm also a visiting professor here at Imperial, which I really enjoy. And essentially, if there's one thing that I would say you need to remember about a career in science, it's, oops, come on, work for me. Yeah, that. Be prepared. Okay? Preparation is everything. And it can take lots of different forms. So I'll give you a quick outline on what we're going to talk about. And the easiest way to explain that is to explain why I've been invited to come and talk to you. One of the reasons is because I've been a professional scientist for about 25 years, so got lots of experience in it. I've had a very varied career, which basically means I've ambled about doing loads of stuff, so that's also handy. I've worked in the public and the private sectors. I've worked for large and small organizations. I've had jobs where I was in the lab and jobs where I've not been in the lab. And I'm also cheap. Basically, offer me a cup of tea and a biscuit and I will turn up to talk. So it makes me very popular. It's great. So ignoring the cheap bit, which is not necessarily career advice, I'm hoping that what I can do is give you some flavor of the careers that are available out there that you can take forwards in terms of thinking about what you want to do. So this is what I do. My role for Pfizer, continuing in the be prepared scheme of things, is that I'm a scout. I mean, my job title sounds very glamorous, Senior Director, External R&D Innovation, but I'm a scout. So my role is to go out and to find opportunities for Pfizer to collaborate, either with academic groups or with biotech companies. So in many ways, it's a great job because I get exposed to all sorts of fantastic science all the time. And the field that I work in is particularly the field of epigenetics, but I also get to learn about loads of other stuff as well. Now, when I started working in industry, which was 12 years ago, it was very different. My job in industry then was a classic lab head job. So I haven't been in a lab for many years, but back then I led a team of scientists who were working on specific projects. And I've kind of just segued out of that gradually to the kind of thing I do now. So my activities on a day-to-day basis, because hell, you all know what it's like working in a lab, I don't need to tell you about that. I have to spend a lot of time talking, basically. I have to work really hard to work with people in R&D throughout Pfizer, and Pfizer is a very big organization, to find out what they're really looking for. What do they really want? What will make us a better company at getting new drugs into patients? I assess new opportunities, so I get sent stuff all the time by academics and by biotech companies, and I have to look at them both in terms of scientific quality and also are they a match for what we're looking for. I meet companies, I present at conferences a lot. If I find something good, I try and get it into Pfizer and get it moved through our systems, and often that involves a lot of persuading other people to do things. What we call landscaping, which is basically thinking not just where are we now, but where is the field moving and where are the new developments that could really make us a better company. And also trying to keep up with scientific developments. So although I don't work in a lab, my job is very much a geek job still. It's very science-based. How did I get here? Well, I started out as a PhD student. I got my degree, and then I was a PhD student, all fresh-faced and happy and la-di-la-la, all really enthusiastic. And then I did my postdoc. And it wasn't that I was bored, it was that I was phenomenally tired, because my postdoc is probably the period in my life when I worked hardest, to the extent that I would sleep in the lab, because it just wasn't worth going home, so I'd sleep in the lab a couple of nights a week. And that was great. And then I became a lecturer and a senior lecturer here at Imperial. Now, at that point, I was kind of doing what we would call, in geek terms, living the dream. In academic terms, I was like uber nerd heaven. I had a research group, I was teaching, which I really enjoy, I was bringing in grant income, I was publishing good papers. All of that was happening, all of those things that you're supposed to be doing as an academic. And then I turned to the dark side. I joined industry. And people are always puzzled about why, having reached nirvana, did I decide to jump out. There were a number of structural reasons. Those weren't actually terribly important. There are two real reasons why I left academia. One was that I was interested in biomedical sciences because I wanted to make an impact for patients. And my research, although I think it was good research, was interesting to other people interested in that same area. I couldn't see that it was ever going to make a difference to patients. And I actually felt that I would have more chance of making a difference to patients in industries that were specifically targeted, in my case, at creating drugs. And you will find, if you talk to scientists in the biotech or pharmaceutical industries, that that's the reason most of them are there. They want to make a difference. The other reason was that I learned to be self-reflective. And I realized that I was a good scientist. I was not a great one. Now, that's fine. Most of us are not great. Okay? Most scientists are good. I'm a good problem solver. What I'm not necessarily is a really good problem identifier. I'm a good problem solver, though. And you can have a perfectly successful career doing that. The majority of people, even those who tell you they're great scientists or not, they're good scientists. I have met some of the greats. I have had the privilege of working with some of the greats, and they are different. And there's not very many of them. I was a good scientist. I didn't want to spend my life just being okay at something. I thought there are other things that I can probably do better. And so I joined a biotech company, and I spent 10 years working in 3 different biotech companies. And then I thought, well, if you're going to be on the dark side, you might as well be on the Death Star. And I joined Pfizer, the world's largest pharmaceutical company. And I'm just remembering now that this is being recorded, and I'm thinking that could come back to bite me. Oh, well. I like changing careers. That's how I got here, right? That's how I got to this really quite cool job that I have. That's how I got there, but how did I change as I got here? And I've done this from my PhD onwards, the schematic I'm about to show you, but I know lots of you are doing masters. You may not go on to do PhDs. That's fine. You can anchor this at any point in your career that you like. Essentially, this is how I changed. I got my PhD in 1992, okay? Just to give you a context for that, I was the only person in my department who had my own word processor, and it had 512 kilobytes of memory on it. And PubMed came on CDs that were updated every 6 months. And Tyrannosaurus Rex roamed the earth. It was a really long time ago. So 1992, I got my PhD. And that was the period where my depth of knowledge was greatest. I knew more about one thing than I ever knew at any other point in my career. And actually, when you finish your PhD, you should know more about that one thing than anyone else in the world. Okay? As I've gone through my career, my depth of knowledge has decreased. I don't know as much about any one thing anymore. I do, however, know a lot more about lots of things. So I'm somebody who I prefers breadth to depth. That probably works better in industry, actually. You have to have a mix, but it probably works better in industry than academia. And it comes to a concept that you may have encountered, which is actually the ideal profile for yourself in terms of depth and breadth. If you want to have a long and varied career, is to be a T-shaped person. So you have something that you're really very good at, which in my case is epigenetics, but you also can do lots of other things. So you're T-shaped. Okay? Most people who thrive, there are the exceptions, so those truly great scientists tend to be depth people, and they're extraordinary. But most people who thrive and have long-lasting and varied careers are T-shaped. We can do depth and breadth. The thing that's really increased for me are my skills. Okay? I can do a lot more. It's not about knowing a lot more, it's about doing a lot more. And that's why every time you go on a careers course, people will bang on to you about transferable skills. And you will be so bored with people talking about transferable skills, but they're what get you the fun jobs. So, what are the skills I use now? Well, it's not lab-based stuff, because I don't do that anymore. It's loads of other stuff. It's all the soft skills. So, scientific expertise, I have to have that. I work in science. The science is a given, okay? Once you get to a certain level, it's just assumed that you can do the science, and you better be able to, because otherwise you will be caught out. So I'm someone who knows my science in the field I specialize in. But it's all the other stuff. It's persuasion. I have to be able, in a large organization, to persuade people to put what we call their political capital behind what I ask for and what I'm trying to encourage them to do. Cultural awareness, and that's not just about different religions or different races. In fact, it's very rarely about that, though it is if you're working with an overseas company, for example. But it's much more about understanding different sectors. It's one of the reasons why I find jobs relatively easily is because I've worked in academia and biotech and pharma. And so lots of people, for example, in Pfizer, have never worked anywhere except Pfizer, and they don't understand that people in academia have a completely different set of pressures on them, and that people in biotech have a different set of pressures. If you can develop that understanding of what the different drivers are for different people, you'll go far. Being able to communicate makes a big difference, and being able to communicate both one-to-one and in large teams. Poor photographers thinking if you could stand still, that would be helpful too. Sorry. Creativity and flexibility. At times, people will say no. You either have to think of a creative way of getting them to say yes, or you have to be flexible. You have to be able to say, okay, maybe we do need to be thinking about something else instead. You have to be persistent. Sometimes you have to learn to grit your teeth. The good thing about gritting your teeth is if you're gritting your teeth, you're keeping your mouth shut, which is probably the thing that I found most difficult. Okay? Sometimes you have to learn just to be quiet. In my case, overcoming jet lag. My role involves a lot of travel, and actually that's something to think about, because for some of you that may work and for some of you it may not. Sometimes it's really difficult. I mean, Costa Rica, that was a tough gig, and Vancouver Island, well, somebody had to do it, and Australia, I was willing to take that hit for the company. Other times, though, there comes a point when you just think, if I never see Boston Airport again, I'll be happy. So, and you have to balance it against, say, your life needs. Does that fit? So there are all things you have to think about. And I'm going to tell you a bit more about why I moved into pharma and biotech. And it's not that I'm trying to sell those to you. It's to give you an idea of why people work in these sectors. But I think they are important. And they're important because basically we need new drugs. There's huge unmet needs. Tell me some diseases that we really need drugs for these days. Alzheimer's, brilliant. Aging population. We have no drugs that work in Alzheimer's. We really don't. Anything else? Sorry? Spinal cord injury, excellent. We can't treat that. You had something. MS, yep, brilliant. Some more? Don't make me start coming up the stairs to interrogate the people at the back. Come on. HIV, yeah, we've turned HIV into a long-term chronic condition, at least in the West, but we still can't cure it. Someone at the back. COPD, very good. Yes, COPD, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, huge numbers of conditions that we don't have good treatments for. And it's particularly difficult, it's particularly important because we have an aging population, so these diseases are going to become more and more prevalent, and we have an increasingly obese population. We need to find ways of tackling the diseases associated with those issues. So that's why most scientists who work in pharma and biotech work there. It's to try and do something about this. Now, you may hear lots of negative things about the pharma industry, shockingly. And it's true, it's an industry that's been in turmoil. So in the past 14 years, between 250,000 and 500,000 people in the pharma industry have lost their jobs. That globally. And it partly reflects that drug discovery and drug development is getting difficult. It's really difficult, actually, to do now and to make money from, and it's a whole load of reasons. Some are that the governments or the insurance companies don't want to pay. Some of it is we simply don't understand the biology that we need to understand to develop great drugs. We have no clue how to treat Alzheimer's. So, it's really difficult to develop drugs. So there's all sorts of reasons, but it's not all doom and gloom. So, not everybody who was laid off was a scientist. Now, I'm not saying that that's fine. I'm not saying it doesn't matter if non-scientists are laid off. What I'm saying is that from your point of view, if you're going to do careers in science, there are still a lot of careers in these industries. Many of the scientists who did leave found jobs in other sectors. So say the people who left pharmaceutical companies, by which we just mean really giant companies, joined smaller drug discovery companies like biotechs. Lots of them also joined contract research organizations. What's happened in the pharmaceutical industry is that the big companies have basically said, I don't want to employ loads of people to do something at expensive US or UK salaries. If I can get those things done cheaper somewhere else, and if I only have to use those people when I need them, not employ them all year. And so there are lots of contract research organizations. Now, the stuff that we would think of as handle turning, which is skilled but kind of routine, 10 years ago, that was all being done in Eastern Europe. Now it's all being done in India and China. In another 10 years, it will be being done in Nigeria. It's wherever there will be a skilled workforce, but where wages are relatively low. But there's always a need for really high-end specialized science and specialized new assays and biology that can be developed from the most cutting-edge research and new technologies that are developed from cutting-edge research. And that's where there's a real growth area in Europe. And Britain's very good at that sort of thing, of developing new companies to exploit the latest research. So never underestimate the contract research organisation sector, because that's going to be really big as you guys move through your careers. And it can be an area where you can do the most interesting science. And although it's still incredibly difficult, the thing that I really want out of my career is I want to be able to look back and say, there is a drug treating patients, and I helped. I think that would be so phenomenal, to know that people were doing better because of something that I played a role in. So, one thing, if you're thinking about your future career, which you clearly all are, because why else would you schlep out to this godforsaken place at 5 o'clock? No disrespect to the Hammersmith, but what an awful location. Is where do you fit? What sort of person do you want to be? Are you an academic or are you an industry person? If you're an industry person, are you pharma or biotech? And I'm really using these as shorthand. Are you big company or small company? Okay? So, think about that, but don't get too hung up on it, because it's not linear. It used to be, if you move to industry, never darken the doors of academia again. So academics were convinced that everybody in industry was second-rate and was just there to turn up as a drone for the money. Some people still think that. They're dying. That's fine. I'm sorry, retiring is the word I should have used. There are still occasionally people in industry who think that everybody in academia is just floating about, having a think, etc. If that were the case, I'd still be here. Yeah. There are smart people and idiots in every single industry and sector and academia, etc. Everywhere. It's not about that. And these days you can move between them. And the research councils in particular are very good at trying to encourage people to move between them. BBSRC has fabulous schemes to allow people to move between these sectors. And there's also lots of collaborative grants that you can get so that you can stay in academia but work with industry and start discovering, do you like that culture and do you like doing translational research, for example. So don't think too much about that as something that you have to make a lifetime decision about now. But it might be worth having a look at what the differences are between them. The first and most obvious thing is that in industry you're trying to make a product. You're trying to create something that you have to sell. That's inevitable. Companies need to maintain income. They have to be able to produce something. But there are other differences. Now, normally I turn up to give talks rather more smartly dressed than this, but sadly the removals men packed all my smart clothes yesterday, so I don't. So this, for me, is very casual now. When I was an academic at Imperial, this, for me, people would have thought I was going to court or something. You know? I mean, I am strictly, by my own, if left to my own devices, I am strictly a jeans and T-shirt woman. And when I was an academic, I did have standards. If I was teaching, I would iron the T-shirt. Okay? But academia remains much less formal than industry, and that's particularly true the bigger the industry that you join, the bigger the company that you join, okay? And it's, in terms of the dress code, it's the thing I hate about industry. One day I will retire, I will buy a really big shredder and I will shred all my business suits. I hate being smartly dressed. But it's not just in terms of dress code. Generally speaking, industry is more formal. I'm not suggesting for a second that one of those is good and one of those is bad. They're just different. You need to think about which one you will fit in better. There are some issues with things being more formal in industry, but there are also good things, because it means that there are better HR practices, typically, for example, because there's more formal procedures. So you just need to think about what you're comfortable with. In academia, provided you can get the funding, which I appreciate is still a big thing, and provided that you have some independence, you can work on whatever you want to work on. That is not the case in industry. In industry, you will be in a team which is all working to a common goal. And it will be very clear what that goal is. And you will also have a very clear role within that team. Doesn't mean that you only get to do one repetitive task, but it's very clear what you're up to, and it's very clear why you're doing it and what you are doing. And there is also more, I think, a sense of we either all succeed or we all fail, simply because you're visible. Things are monitored. So again, think about what you're comfortable with. I quite like that about industry. I like the sense of shared purpose. That's a really good thing, but it does have a flip side. In academia, if you can keep getting the money, and as we said, that is a big if, you can keep working on what you want to work on. In industry, you may have been working for, I don't know, 5 years on a program. And if you're any kind of a scientist or any kind of a good employee, you throw yourself into what you're doing, and it really matters to you. And then the edict may come down from on high that says, we're stopping that. We're not working on that anymore, and there will be nothing you can do about it. And it may not even be because the program has failed. It might not be that the program has run up against some stumbling block that means what you are working on is never going to cure a patient. It may simply be that the company has decided, actually, we're going to put all our resources over there, and we're not going to do that thing anymore. And that's something that you need to consider, because that can be emotionally really hard, to be honest. Now, if you're looking at moving into industry, do you go to a big company or a little company? That's a question you face. And there are pros and cons. And in biotech, people will always tell you, and in small companies, they'll always say, yeah, the thing about biotech is like, we're like a nimble ocean yacht. And as conditions change, we can change course, whereas the pharma industry is like this great big oil tanker. And it takes it forever to change, whereas we in biotech can adapt to conditions better. And it's sort of true. But having worked in both biotech and academia, biotech and pharma, there are differences. And they're not quite as black and white as you'll make out. Yes, in biotech, you can change your plan really quickly. It's a very strong likelihood you will have absolutely no money to implement your new plan, but you can change your plan. In a large pharmaceutical company or a large company of any description, it will take ages before the decision makers finally go through their entire process and say, yes, we've made a decision, we're going to do X. But once they decide to do it, there's lots of resources put behind doing it. So again, think about which of those you'd be more comfortable with. Small companies and big companies, training. In a small company, you tend to learn much more in a casual, hands-on way. So I moved from the first company I joined, I was head of molecular biology and pharmacology, and the second company I was head of biology. If you join smaller and smaller companies, you get bigger and bigger job titles. It's fantastic. If I had gone to a fourth biotech company, my business card would now simply say Nessa Carey, mistress of all she surveys. Because, you know, my titles just got more and more ridiculous. Anyway, I became head of biology. Now, I'm a molecular biologist. I know nothing that doesn't, once something gets outside an Eppendorf tube, I have no clue. I got to this new company and they went, oh yes, the head of biology before you, she ran all the toxicology trials for our compound, which is going into phase 1 in the clinic. So you'll be taking responsibility for all the toxicology and safety pharmacology trials, just because we had the same job title. I had no clue. I'd never done anything of the kind before. So I learned. I got someone to come in and teach me. I learned how to do it, and I learned a lot on the job. That's what happens to you all the time in small companies. It's great fun, but you can end up with sudden gaps in your knowledge. Big companies, obviously you learn how to do things, particularly because big companies will, for any technique, they'll have a standard operating procedure. But they will also train you specifically in things. They'll send you off for courses to do things, which doesn't happen as much in small companies. So again, it's about what challenge you like. Opportunities. One of the biggest problems in a small company is at some point you will run up against a brick wall, and it doesn't matter how good you are, there is no promotion opportunity, because the company is small and it is frowned upon to kill the people above you. Okay? So there will be no job opportunities. You will run smack against a wall. So if you want to progress then, you have to be ready to move companies. Big companies are very different. You can go in at one level doing one thing and you will have the opportunity to end up doing all sorts of different things. So even in Pfizer, I know people who started in the lab, and some of them now run clinical trials. Some of them run business development. Some of them have become patent attorneys. In big companies, there is more opportunity to learn more things within that company. So again, it's what you're comfortable with. But everyone has to have a role model. Here's mine. Anyone know who this is? I know that you do, just tell me. It's Sid. It's Sid from Ice Age. The reason he's up here is the last biotech company that I worked in, we were a very small company. And I was chatting to a friend's 3-year-old daughter. And I was talking to her, and she'd just been to see Ice Age. And she said, it was great. It was great, Nessa. And I said, what was the best thing? And she said, it was Sid. Sid was the best thing. And I said, why? And she said, because he's so funny. He kept doing this. We're going to live. We're going to die. And I looked at her and I thought, oh my God, that's my life in a biotech company. And it absolutely is. If you're in a small company, there's always that. We're going to be millionaires. Oh my God, we're all going to be jobless. That you're on this constant rocker of everything will be marvelous, everything's a disaster, because the money's going to run out. And again, you need to think, are you comfortable with that? Are you not? Which is essentially what this slide is about. I can tell you about different sectors. I can tell you about different work experiences in different companies. I can't tell you what's right for you. Only you can work that out. And to do that, you have to do something which is very alien to us as scientists, I think, which is you have to think about yourself. You actually have to look at yourself and think, what do I like? You have to think, who am I? What's really important to me? What genuinely drives me? What am I interested in short term? What am I interested in long term? Is money a big driver for me? If it is, that's fine. Just acknowledge it, okay? Nothing wrong, nothing right. Just about what's right for you. So work it out. Do you want to spend 16 hours a day at work? Do you not? Doesn't matter. Both of those are fine. But you decide. Those are things you have to start thinking about. So what do you want to do if you do decide that you fancy a career in industry? What do you need to develop? You'll need to develop, ultimately, all of these things. Now, you can't develop them all at once. And they're dependent on the stage you're at in your career. But if you want a long career in industry, you need to be thinking about all these things. Because all those people who lost their jobs in industry, they were all good scientists. But the people who kept their jobs were good scientists and had the other skills. That's what differentiates them. There are loads of people who are just as good at science as me, and there are loads of people who are a damn sight better than me at running assays or designing assays. I've managed to keep working because I have other skills that are needed these days. I've been really lucky from that point of view. So, as I said, you have to have scientific expertise. That's why you're all doing the kind of courses that you are, because you are people who are keen on scientific expertise, so that's fine. Creativity, time management. Have to be able to do what you say you'll do when you say you'll do it. If you can do that, you will be ahead of about 90% of people. You have to be independent, but you have to do teamwork. Okay? Communication, they want people with leadership and determined, and this is massive, potential. It's really difficult to demonstrate potential, but something to remember is particularly big companies. Big companies are much more explicit than small companies, but also than academia, on the fact that they hire you not just for what you have done, but for what they think you can do. And they hire you being fully aware that by hiring you, they are taking a risk and they are making an investment. So they will hire you because they think you have potential. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, have you any idea what my master's course is like or what my supervisor is like? I don't have the time to do any of these things. You do. You absolutely do. You just have to think about them in a different way. Okay? So, we all know that old slogan, just say no. Perfectly fine about heroin, okay? Not a good idea as a motto for work. Just say yes, okay? When people ask you to do things, say yes, but make sure you deliver. And when you think about your CV, think explicitly about what the transferable skills are going to be. Now, you don't sit there necessarily thinking, okay, today I have to do something that demonstrates leadership. What you have to do is when your supervisor says to you, can you look after this undergraduate who's doing a summer placement, say yes, because that will give you experience at supervision and at communication. When they say, can you give a talk, you say yes, etc. Every time they say something, you think, don't think about what that task is, think about what it gives me experience of having done, that I can put on a CV. Because if you put on a CV saying, I am good at communication, it's like saying I have a good sense of humour. Okay? Nobody can test it. Nobody can see that that statement is true. If you put, I'm good at communication because I won the department's prize for blah, 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 you've demonstrated. Okay? The reason that I got my lectureship at Imperial, and I got my lectureship before I finished my first postdoc, was not because I was the best scientist. It was because I was the person who had constantly, not actually, I have to my shame because I was thinking about career development, but just because I enjoyed it, who had always said yes. Will you teach will you tutor some students? Yes, I will. Will you supervise exams? Yes, I will. Will you teach 220 medical students about Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium? In my head, I heard, Hardy what now? What I actually said was, yes, I will. And I did. Okay? It's about saying yes and just doing stuff, because that's what sets you apart. Okay? Always do it. So, heading towards the end, free advice. Always take the more interesting path. Whenever you're faced with two options, and one looks more interesting than the other, even and probably particularly if it's scary, take that one. Okay? Interesting is always better. This is what I did. Okay? Of course, it depends. If you're thinking, this woman is insane, yeah, then this probably isn't such a strong story. But here we go. I started out doing veterinary medicine. Okay? That's what I did after A-levels. I went to Edinburgh to become a vet. It was a disaster. Absolute disaster. For a start, I can't think in 3 dimensions. Find me a 2-dimensional animal, I would probably be an awesome vet, but I can't think in 3 dimensions, so I can't do spatial stuff, so I couldn't do anatomy at all. I'm also allergic to fur, feathers, and hay. And I look shockingly bad in a Barber jacket, so all of it was disastrous. So I left veterinary medicine, I dropped out. First really adult decision I ever made, and I became a forensic scientist for the Metropolitan Police. I had always wanted to do forensic science. When I was about 8 years old, I used to wander around the primary school playground reading biographies of the great pathologists. Those were the days before you were taken into care for that kind of thing. I have no idea why anyone thought it was perfectly appropriate my parents gave me these books. Anyway, I became a forensic scientist. And I would love to tell you that because I went and I grabbed that opportunity. Actually, I went to Catford Job Centre and it said, short order chef, couldn't cook. Van driver, couldn't drive. Forensic scientist, oh, I'll have that one. Right? But I'm sure that you can do it more directly. While I was a forensic scientist, I did a degree in immunology. And then I did a PhD in virology. And then I did my postdoc in human genetics. So again, as you can see, all I ever did was follow what was interesting. They just seemed interesting at the time. I started out working in neuroscience in industry, and then I moved into oncology. And then I got a bit bored again, so then I wrote a book called The Epigenetics Revolution. 99p on the Kindle special offer at the moment, if anyone's interested. It's a real page-turner, you'll love it, honestly. So, just do different things as they seem interesting to you. More free advice. Do not drift. If you decide to become do a PhD, great, fantastic, do a PhD. Then do a postdoc if you like. Don't just keep doing postdoc positions. Always think, what's the next step? Not just what do I drift into? Extra roles and responsibilities, more people notice than you think, as I mentioned. Get loads of advice, just talk to loads of people. If, for example, everyone you talk to from the pharmaceutical industry seems to be a complete idiot, then that's probably not the career path for you. Okay? On the other hand, if you want to know about the pharmaceutical industry, please don't talk to your supervisors. They have no clue, okay? Because they won't ever have worked in it. You might as well talk to me about being a chimney sweep. I don't know, okay? So don't do that, but talk to lots of people. Always think in terms of skills. Think, the next thing that I do, how am I going to be different at the end of that thing from where I am now? And it's always about skills. It's always about what you can do. It's never about what you know, because knowing stuff is easy. Every single one of us in this room is good at knowing stuff. That's why we're in this room, because we're really good at knowing stuff, learning stuff. We can do that every day of our lives. It's not knowing stuff that's important, it's what you can do. And be active. Take charge of your own career. Nobody else is going to do this for you. Okay? It's really important. And again, if you go down the postdoc route, don't listen to your supervisor if your supervisor keeps saying, don't worry, you'll be fine, I'll get a renewal on the grant. You know, you just stay another few years. What that means is, I really want this paper in Nature, and I need you here slaving in the lab. Okay? At some point, remember that the drivers on them are different on the drivers on you. Best career advice I ever got was actually when I was in your position and somebody else was up here. It was in a conference in Montreal, and it was women geneticists talking about their careers in genetics. And it was this one woman who'd been an academic, and she, out of the blue, got offered an amazing job in industry, and she'd never even thought about moving to industry, and it seemed to have loads going for it, but it was not what she'd ever thought of. And so she phoned the person who was essentially her mentor, and she laid it all out, and she said, what do I do? And she was expecting her mentor to come back with a list of pros and cons and you should do this. And actually what her mentor came back with was a much pithier statement. Her mentor said, when opportunity comes knocking, don't be in the shower. Absolutely true. If opportunity comes along, it is not a lengthy visitor, okay? Make the most of it. Do stuff. It might not come again. So just always think, yep, now's the time. And the corollary of that is you don't need to overplan. Everyone goes on and on at you about plan, 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 plan. And you can plan all you like. It won't make any difference. When I was 20, I knew I'd be a forensic scientist, okay? Forever. When I was 30, I knew I'd be an academic forever. When I was 40, I knew I'd never join a pharmaceutical company. And here I am, of an undisclosed age, in the world's largest pharmaceutical company. Have an idea of what you want to do next, but don't think that any decision that you make, that's it, it's terrifying, it's a really scary decision because it's going to be what you have to do for the rest of your life. It isn't. If you're good, you'll always find new opportunities. If you prefer something more tasteful than a still from Psycho, you can have this quote from W.B. Yeats. A king is but a foolish labourer who wastes his blood to be another's dream. What it essentially means is a really straightforward thing. It's your life. You're the only one who can live it, right? You can do whatever you like to please other people. I'm not sure why you would, though, because they're not you. You'll never particularly make them happy by doing that. Do what is right for you. There is nothing wrong with working out what's right for you and what you should do. And that's partly because of that final point. People always think, if I'm really successful, I'll be happy. I think it's the other way round. If you're happy at what you're doing, you are much more likely to be successful. The famous golfer in the 1970s, Arnold Palmer, somebody once said to him, you seem to be a very lucky golfer. And he said, yes, I am. But I find that the harder I work, the luckier I get. And it's absolutely true. If you enjoy what you're doing, you'll work hard at it and you'll almost inevitably be successful. Even if the role you're in at that time, because I've had a job that I didn't enjoy particularly, and I left it as soon as I could, but it set me up fantastically for the next one. You've all kind of won the life luck lottery. You've all got to here, which means you survived childhood diseases that kill loads of children. You had an opportunity to go to school. You probably came from a family environment in which you were encouraged to go to school. Basically, for all of you, just like me, 98% of the work has already been done. So you don't need to panic, and you don't need to obsess. 98% of your success is already guaranteed. There's only 2% left. I've made those figures up, but they seem all right to me. There's only 2% left. So all you have to do is get that bit right. So don't panic about it. It's not that big a deal. Just choose what you think is right for you, and you know better than anyone else, so you will be right if you choose that. And that really is it. There is no secret. Happy to take questions. I'm done.